And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is December the 23rd, 2020, the week of Christmas. Merry Christmas to all of you, and thank you so much for tuning in. Tonight, it is my great pleasure to be able to host a roundtable discussion with grassroots producers from all across the country. I'm gonna go around the horn here and introduce who we have on tonight. We have Jay Platt, our board member from Arizona, and representing New Mexico as well. We have Mike Jones hailing from Arkansas, representing Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And then we have George Washon, the youngest of our board members, but very, very seasoned in the cattle industry, representing Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington State. Thank you all so much for being on. I know it's a week where people are busy, it's Christmas time, but we're so glad to have you. And then, of course, Bill Bullard, our CEO, who does not need an introduction, but we're so thankful for him. Tonight, we are this is part 2 of the cattle industry long-range plan that our board of directors have put together as a response to the beef industry long-range plan, which was released this July at the NCBA meeting funded by your checkoff dollars. And so I'm going to read the vision of what this long-range plan includes, and then we'll get right to it. The vision of our plan is to be profitable and viable in the United States agriculture industry that supports rural communities and is comprised of widely dispersed, family-owned and family-operated cattle farms and ranches whose owners and operators are free to make their own production and marketing decisions. And with that, we are going to jump right in here, and we're going to start off with you, Jay. We are all working cattle producers. The board of directors of RCAF are grassroots working cattle producers. And they compiled a long-range plan. You all compiled a long-range plan that's different, very, very different from the beef industry long-range plan. Why did we feel as a board, as RCAF, that we needed to have a plan to actually move the industry forward? And really, how is it different from the beef plan?
Well, first, I think it's much simpler, shorter, and more concise. Beyond that, it targets things that are of specific benefit to cattle producers. It's not a generic, broad-based, loose language kind of a plan. It's very simple, and it's targeted to things that can be done to improve the profitability of livestock producers. So it's something that you can look at almost like bullet points, bing, 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 with kind of an explanation of what that particular item will do for cattle producers.
Well, our goal with this plan this is not just a plan for RCAF members, is it, Jay? This is a plan for the entire industry, regardless of whatever affiliation you're wearing on your ball cap, or maybe you're not wearing any affiliation, you're not affiliated at all. This is really our plea, so to speak, to reach out to the industry and say, hey, link arms with us. Let's save our industry and let's become profitable again.
Right, and that's why I use the term producers. It's designed for producers nationwide, regardless of any particular affiliation.
George, our plan is really designed to prioritize the cattle industry and not the beef industry, and they're not synonymous with each other. There are 6 points of this plan. The first point we're going to talk about tonight is growing demand for the U.S. cattle industry by growing demand for U.S. born, raised, and harvested cattle. You are on the Canadian border, and so many times we get the question about these imported cattle coming over from Canada or Mexico, and people think, man, why is RCAF against people making money on these calves? What do you say to that claim?
Well, I wouldn't really say RCAF's against the making money portion of it, but what we're against is the market manipulation and market suppression, you might say, of our domestic cattle industry. and how the importation of Canadian cattle coming into the United States and how that can adjust our own markets, whether it be feeder cattle or live cattle, fats going into the plants and that type of deal. That changes up our market. It might be just for a couple of weeks and the market takes a kind of a slump. It might be for a month, or it might take a complete region and slide it downhill where they can't, where your larger packers can bring in a high amount of imported cattle, well, and just kind of slowly ease a certain region of their cattle market downhill. And so it's not necessarily against the people that are bringing in cattle into the United States. It's the way that they use it to manipulate our markets here in the U.S. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. You know, a lot of people say, well, international trade goes both ways. Yeah, but we're using our own cattle to manipulate it against us, and the imported cattle manipulate our own markets within us on their timely importation.
What about you, Jay Platt? You're on that Mexican border. You see those calves coming across the border every day. I live in Western Kansas, the home of a lot of cattle hotels up here, and I get that question a lot. They say to me, why is our calf against us buying these cheap Mexican calves and bringing them and feeding them out up here? And I say, we're not against people making money. We're against people putting their neighbors out of business. What do you see down there with your neighbors? How do folks, producers, feel down there?
Well, I personally know people in Arizona that have done just that. I think it's something on the order of 1.3 million head of cattle a year come across the border into Arizona. But let me just give you a couple of numbers, I think, that put this in perspective. 75% of all of Canada's exports go to the US. We are by far the largest destination for Canadian exports. The US is Canada's largest agricultural export market. Over half of Canada's food products come into this country, and exports account for 30% of Canadian GDP. So in other words, you could almost say we're a dumping ground for Canada. Similarly, in Mexico, 35% of Mexico's GDP is made up of exports. And again, we're a large market for her exports. So I don't think it's so much a matter of wishing to prohibit somebody from making money on a calf, so much as it is, as George has pointed out, these two sources are fertile ground for market manipulation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mike Jones.
Go for it. I was going to say, to add on to Jay's issue is, you know, earlier this year during the COVID pandemic, that brought up a lot of different cattle issues that have been there, more or less shined a spotlight on a lot of our issues within the cattle industry. Well, one of the things that we saw is we had feeders throughout this nation that could hardly even get a kill date. A lot of them couldn't get their cattle into a processing plant. But at that very same time, you know, I saw Canadian cattle trucks rolling down the highway and unloading Canadian imported cattle into the processing plants. The Canadian imports during this time where our own domestic producers struggled to sell cattle, during that same time, there was Canadian cattle coming into the United States. They hardly even slowed down. And so, I mean, that right there shined a humongous spotlight onto the issue that we all have known have been going along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point, George. Mike, before I get to you, and if at any time you all want to jump in, just please go ahead and do so. But there are there are 6 points of our cattle long range plan. The first point, of course, is to grow demand for U.S. cattle. But within that, we have 7 targeted bullet points. And so quickly, I'm going to just brush over those. And then Mike Jones, I'm going to get to you. The first point is that we immediately want to pass legislation to require all beef from cattle harvested in the U.S. to be labeled as to where the animal was born, raised, and harvested. So for instance, Jay, if those calves are coming across the Mexican border or the Canadian border, those calves, that label would be born in Mexico or born in Canada, raised in the US, slaughtered in the US. And Bill will get to you at the end, but what the industry says is, well, that costs us, well, we can just address it now. That particular point on getting legislation passed and that costing US producers with that label, is that a true statement? When we had Cool, did it cost producers for the packers to put that label on their packages?
Well, what's fueling that argument is the economists that have sided with the beef industry for many, many years. And they do not like country of origin labeling because they have been a part of the global effort to eliminate borders. And so their position is it doesn't matter where it was born or raised, it's beef once it's slaughtered in a US packing plant. So what they missed the point is when we had country of origin labeling, so this is based on real evidence, it didn't cost producers anything. It cost the rest of the industry, the downstream industry had to maintain the integrity of that information from the live animal all the way to the consumer. And as a result, in concert, what US cattle producers realized was some of the highest prices in the history of their industry. And so it's very difficult for anyone to argue that it would cost the producers. In fact, we actually had a more cumbersome methodology of making declarations of origin imposed on the cattle producers than actually was necessary. But at the time, all producers had to do was sign an affidavit, and certainly that isn't costly. And so the cost was not borne by the US cattle industry. The costs that have been complained of are the costs associated with the meat packers having to inform the retailers as to where the animal or the beef actually originated. But that's the essence of competition. You cannot have competition in a retail market if consumers cannot distinguish between one product or another. That's basic, fundamental. And so as you're talking about, that's what this plan does. It says we're going to create the opportunity for competition at the beef market, and we're going to create the opportunity for the US cattle producer to benefit in their home court. Because clearly, as this Made in America effort has expanded, people are looking for ways to help American supply chains. And buying USA beef is the best way there is that a consumer can help support the American rancher.
Mm-hmm. Mike Jones, we also want to pass legislation to require all imported cattle, of course, as we've been speaking, to be permanently marked with their country of origin. We want to repeal the current beef checkoff program. We want to develop a nationwide producer-oriented program for the promotion and marketing of beef. We certainly want to be involved still with promoting beef. We want to reform international trade rules, and we want to be engaging with consumer groups to educate them. Mike, what are producers in Arkansas saying about country of origin labeling? I know you have not been part of RCAF for that long. I met you maybe a couple of years ago at a meeting in Missouri, and you were fully on board, and we're so pleased to have you. But you're pretty new to RCAF, so how did you get involved, and what are the producers in your area saying about country of origin labeling?
Yeah, we got involved with RCAF about 2016, watching our markets kind of fall, and we all struggled around to try and, be part of something that's going to make things better for us as ranchers and farmers in the cattle business in the South. Watching the Facebook live videos and got a friend of mine and I interested, and we came up and went to the first meeting in Auction in Missouri, and I kind of been on board heavy duty since then. The COVID kind of slowed us down. We're going to have some meetings down here in Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana when this thing kind of breaks. But getting back to your our bullet points over here, I think for us producers in the South, we're mainly, I'm going to say probably 70–80% of us down in this part of the world are cow-calf operators. And we realize that mandatory country origin labeling is vitally important to the cost or the profitability of our calves when they leave us at 5 or 6 weights or whatever it may be. Like you said, back in 14, when we did have mandatory cool, didn't cost us anything. And we saw prices, we sold some calves for $2.80, which is unheard of today. And then we looked around and it was gone and we didn't do anything about it. Now we're all trying to get on board. I feel like no matter where you are, what kind of cattle you raise, whether it's eared cattle or English cattle or whatever it may be, trying to get some of these things to fight to get this mandatory country origin labeling, the 5014. We got to reform our checkoff. It's like I was telling some guys the other day, I said, when's the last time you saw a commercial on TV that said, what's for dinner? Beef. Nobody could tell me when the last time they saw a commercial about beef. Now, we've got to use those dollars that we producers pay to do something to promote American born, raised, and harvested beef. And if we don't do it, we're going to be sucked up by this globalism world. And as far as I'm concerned, I want my kids to be able to be in the ranching business. I have pride in my cattle, my horses, and my ground. And I think all producers do. I don't think that I'm alone in that by any means, whether you're from Arizona, California, North Dakota, South Dakota, New York, or wherever you may be, that we all got to stand up and we've got to do something to help promote and pass this legislation, whether it's calling our representatives, calling our senators. We need to reform these rules on this trade. We just been kicked in the teeth every time you turn around. And I think it's really important. And I think our producers here in the South that I talk to, that mandatory country of origin labeling is the most important thing that can get us somewhere the quickest. And like I said, these goals are 5-year goals, but we got to do something now. And I think that one helps us now. So I think that's what we're feeling as cow-calf producers in this part of the world.
Well, I have to apologize. I didn't realize that you've been part of RCAF since 2016 because I didn't meet you until a couple of years ago. You've been flying under the radar, Mike. But
yeah, we there's a lot of people that's done that, and it's time to stand up and we got to fight for this deal. If we don't, we won't be here anymore. And the times of hey, somebody else will take care of that are over. Nobody is left to take care of it. I'm 50 years old, and we're all getting older, and there's not many of these young people coming around, and so we gotta push this thing now.
Absolutely, it is. It's hard. Young people, we're not seeing unless you've been. There's a fella that's a part of RCAF. What does he say? Unless you've inherited it or married into it, it's real hard to get started in the ranching business. And well, Mike, I'm glad you've come on the scene and made yourself known the last couple of years. You and Lewis, and we're thankful. We're very thankful. We're excited to get down to the South and do some meetings. Bill, last week during our Facebook Live, Von Meyer said, I want to make sure I quote him right. He said on our social media, he said that cull cows should be worth more than 50 cents if the chief argument for these imports is that we need cheap grinding product to fulfill demand. What do you say to that in response to our last point about increasing demand of U.S. beef, which is that we want to encourage American pet food manufacturers to source protein ingredients from cattle exclusively born, raised, and harvested in the U.S. That's not something we've talked about a lot before, but it's important. I know when I go to Orchlands or Tractor Supply to buy my dog bones or my dog food, whatever, I look at that, and a lot of people look at that. And so talk about why RCAF decided to throw this pet food piece into our long-range plan.
Well, as you mentioned, the price of cull cows is seriously depressed. And it's depressed at a time when beef demand is at an all-time high, and yet we continue to import, this leaner product. and use that in lieu of, in many instances, the available lean beef that we have right here in the form of cull cows, cull bulls. And so we need to be proactive. We need to be good marketers for our industry. We need to look at new markets for the products that we do produce. And we need to do as much as we can domestically, because that's the only way you're going to strengthen America's economy, is if you rebuild America's depleted supply chains. And that's what the cattle industry is. It's a supply chain to the multi-segmented and very profitable beef industry. And so what we're looking at is, well, how can we do that? How can we take advantage of the increasing desire on the part of consumers to buy American, and those who are very concerned about the food that they're put in their own bodies? But it's a phenomenon. You know, they care about where their pet food comes from. And right now, you'll go to a pet food store. Many of us have dogs, and look at the packages, and it says, you know, product of the USA, made from ingredients sourced around the globe. Well, why aren't we sourcing that from the byproducts that we produce right here? Why don't we help the pet food manufacturers, and it's a big industry, help them begin sourcing their American beef products for pet food? But you don't stop there. Why don't we explore opportunities for young entrants to get into the industry and take some of these, create a niche market for lean beef, and produce more of that here. In fact, the measurable goals that we have for these strategies that we've established is that by 2025, we want at least 90% of all the best domestic beef advertisements to be advertising beef born, raised, and slaughtered in the United States. And we want to increase those pet food manufacturers that are willing to source exclusively the USA product. That can only help our industry, can only help build demand for all of the various products produced from the animal once it's slaughtered. So it's the first step. You know, our industry hasn't done that before. We haven't looked for new avenues with which to create new niche markets for both new entrants and for producers. And there may be producers out there who have operations just suitable for producing lean beef and not following, you know, the grain-fed process, but producing for this other market. So those are opportunities we need to explore, and that's what makes this plan unique. It's focused specifically on the cattle industry, and it's not reactionary. It's looking far into the future and saying, we need to begin today to make improvements that will help our industry 5 years from today. So this is just a start.
Mm-hmm. I was going through videos on my phone today, and I saw a video that I had recorded off the television a year ago. It was a Rachel Ray commercial, and she was advertising her pet food. And she specifically, it was all about sourced with USA products, sourced with USA beef, sourced with USA chicken. And so interestingly, when the industry says people don't care where their food comes, that's a lie. Not only do they not care where their food comes, they care where their animals' food comes from. So sure. I'll be posting that in our social media just because it's a point of interest that consumers certainly do care.
Well, I think it's important to clarify that this is but a small part of the plan, but it is a part of the plan that clearly exemplifies the RCAP board's desire to be proactive and to create opportunities that do not now exist in the industries, opportunities to be more profitable for cattle producers.
We're getting ready to have a new class of representatives and senators in DC. And one of our goals for this next legislative session is to find someone to carry a country of origin labeling bill. And I know that all of you, I know George has spoken with some of his congressmen and senators. I know you have, Mike Jones, you've contacted your senators there. And so, you know, citizen lobbying, it's so important. Mike, speak on that, touch on that just briefly. If you're a producer and you're sitting in Utah right now or West Virginia and you're listening to us and you're like, this sounds great, but how do we get there? You know, you were just a guy, and yet you made a few phone calls and got Bill on the phone And that's called citizen lobbying. Was a little uncomfortable, maybe.
Well, I'll tell you, it goes back to, well, it's time for me to do something because nobody else is going to do it. Picked up the phone, went to trying to looking up phone numbers to my congressman that have no, one of them I had some contact with, that's a cow-calf guy, parents were, showed livestock, so forth. But these other guys, I had no idea how to even get a hold of them. And look, within a matter of hours, their aides were calling me, wanting to talk to me, wanting to know what they could do for me. Interested in our deal, interested in RCAF. How many members do we have is one of the important things that we got to grow as a group. But it's pretty easy. You just look it up and call them and say, hey, I'm in a cow-calf operation, or I'm in a feeder operation. My profits are horrible. I'm struggling out here. We've got to do something with this issue of this beef coming in from outside of the U.S. that's hurting our markets. It's not really rocket science. It's just pure grit that you just say what's on your mind and talk about what's, hurting your business, just like a doctor, a lawyer, or a car manufacturer, or whatever would do. Tell them what your problems are. And they all wanted to listen. But unless we all get together and make more than one phone call, then it's kind of falling a little bit on deaf ears, but you got to start somewhere.
That is absolutely true. George Bashan, the cavalry's not coming, are they, to save us? We're the cavalry, cattle producers across the country.
Yes, we are. And I mean, that's the thing that we need to do. The RCAF board has been on the phone with very many different members of Congress, Senate, House, the whole 9 yards. We'll talk to them, and different staffers have gotten to know us on a first name basis. But the thing that we also need to do is we need to have the different producers in the different zones calling and more or less repeating the same thing. And, if we can all get together and ask for some of the important things, country of origin labeling, spot market protection are kind of two of the big ones that we've been fighting for. But, RCAF board and staff can talk about it a lot, but we also need to do our part in citizen lobbying and self-governance, and we need to have our membership also going to our congressional members and our different representatives in the government and hearing to us that we need, certain things in the cattle industry to keep us viable and to actually keep us sustainable and profitable.
Mm-hmm. If COVID-19 did anything, it sure did shine a real big light on the food supply, didn't it, guys? And that for the first time, we actually had people calling us from DC saying, hey, what can we do to help? And so now, we have a real opportunity that people were, I think COVID, scared some folks. Some of the other legislation, Jay, we're working on, it leads into our second point, which is to increase competition and market transparency for U.S. born and raised cattle. This within these points, I'll read just a few of them quickly. To immediately pass S3693, which is the Spot Market Protection Bill, otherwise known as the 5014 bill. And there's a House bill companion as well, HR 7501, to vigorously enforce the United States antitrust laws and the Packers and Stockyards Act, to pass legislation to ban packer ownership, to promote and encouragement development of more local and regional beef packing facilities, and to amend the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act to eliminate confidentiality guidelines and prevent reporting in regions lacking competition, and to increase opportunities for cattle producers to retain ownership of their cattle through the sale of beef directly to the consumers. Jay, let's talk about how what this actually is going to look like to get this legislation passed, whether it's a country of origin labeling bill, the 5014 bill, and why did the RCAF board so vigorously want to get these two bills passed? We have talked about it every time we have a meeting. We've had lots of meetings. What would those two bills, specifically 5014, since we've covered cool, What does that do for our markets?
Well, Bill and I were just chatting about this before we started this, and he gave me some interesting numbers, and you could correct me, Bill, if my memory has faded, but roughly 60 to 65% of cattle trades are formula cattle. So there's not a fixed price on those going in. You've got 20% roughly that are traded on the cash market, and about 11% on some kind of a forward contract basis, and about 3% on a grid. Is that roughly right, Bill?
Yes.
From my recollection?
Yes.
And so when you talk about this 5014 bill, one of the things that I hear from, for example, Farm Bureau people who question me about this is, well, gee, you're going to destroy formula cattle. Bill had a very good point. If we go back to the mid 2000s, this bill, this 5014 bill, would take us back to that time period. So we're not that far away time-wise from what this bill would do. And I would suggest that we were a lot better off in the mid 2000s when you did have a higher percentage of these cattle traded on a cash market. You had some transparency, you had fixed prices, and all of that has disappeared with a shrinking cash market and an ever expanding formula cattle market. So I think that that is a very key thing in restoring profitability to producers, transparency and a competitive cash market.
Mm-hmm. My next question was for George Washon, but I'm not sure that George is with us right now. Oh,
I'm here.
there he is. Good deal.
Yep.
So George, for years, the industry has said that we need to promote beef and you need to work with us. We need to promote demand. Well, guess what? We've promoted demand. We've done it. Cattle price or beef prices in the grocery store are as high as they've ever been. And yet cattle producers are not sharing in those profits. What does this point of increasing competition and market transparency do for our markets, in your opinion?
Well, competitions is always good for the marketplace. First and foremost, if we had more packers competing, they'd probably be able to get a few more dollars a head out of fats. And then also at the same time, just competition all the way around basically brings things into focus a little bit more. It'll help out the grocers. They'll be able to source their beef probably a little more affordable. And if we had more competition, we'd also probably be able to sell cattle for a bit more. But talking about the demand, beef demand's great. But one of the things we have to remember is that one of the best beef markets we have is right here in the domestic marketplace. A lot of people seem to forget that's our best market is right here at home. And the United States does not currently produce enough pounds of beef for its own demands. We're a net importer of pounds of beef. And so there's a few things to kind of keep in scope is that demand is good, but at the same time, we need to be able to keep things right, and competition all the way around will help out. I'm sure some of the other people on the call could help me for that. But that's kind of one of the things that I see is sometimes we're advertising maybe to the wrong crowd when we need to be remembering that right here at home is one of the best places we have for the marketplace.
Bill, you mentioned you have a slide. I can picture it. You mentioned that in your presentation a lot, that the U.S. market is our greatest market. Why are we not promoting USA beef specifically to U.S. consumers?
Well, and our plan addresses that, jumping back to the first one of growing demand for United States cattle. We address the fact that right now, those millions of head of cattle that are imported, and hundreds of thousands of those are imported for immediate slaughter from Canada. And those cattle are brought into a U.S. packing plant. They're fabricated there, and the resulting beef is sold abroad in foreign markets as a product of the USA, even though there was not a penny's worth of value added to that foreign animal from any cattle producer in the United States. So the benefit falls specifically to the beef packer. The beef packer is able to source these imported animals, slaughter them in a US plant, and then label the resulting beef as a product of USA. And your beef checkoff dollars help to promote that in foreign countries. But as you say, we can't do the same thing here in America. And so our plan addresses that. You know, we should reform international trade agreements to reestablish the origin as the country in which the animal had been born, raised, and harvested. And that would give the domestic producer an equal level playing field to compete with these imports, even in the export market. And that's why our plan includes both domestic market and export. We need to promote the US cattle producers' beef produced from their cattle. And we need to do that domestically, and we need to do it abroad. But we can't do that under the current labeling regime that really creates an imbalance and throws the advantage to the multinational meat packers and to foreign countries.
Mike Jones,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to add to that. I think you know this with labeling our beef and having it shown that it's grown, you know, here in the U.S. and harvested here. You can ask anybody. I think you can go down the street and ask any person that wants a hamburger or a steak. Would you rather have meat that was raised right here in Arkansas or the USA, or you want something from Mexico or Brazil or some other country? And I guarantee you 100% of them is going to tell you right here. And they think they're getting that when they go to the grocery store now. It's like some of these things, we've got to pass this legislation to show that this is our cattle. And even if you go overseas, and I've been overseas, and you talk about meat, well, they will tell you 9 out of 10 times the best beef comes from the USA. Mm-hmm. And so we have to stand on our product, and we have to fight to show that we have a good, we know we have a good product, but we have to use the legislation to get this promoted so it benefits us as producers. Because if we can't continue to support our ranches and farms on below minimum break-even pricing for these calves, so the only way to do it is to get some of these bullet points that we have on this plan done.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, what did you see when COVID hit? Of course, the whole country freaked out because the meat shelves were empty. And so part of our plan, here's one of our pieces: promote and encourage development of more local and regional beef packing capacities. Examples of such encouragement include support of HR 2859, the Prime Act, and HR 7162, expanding markets for state inspected meat processors Act of 2020. Do you think a lot of people were surprised when, again, COVID just really shined a light on things that we knew that had been happening for a long time, but that bottleneck that happened in our meat processing facilities, you think people were surprised at how that really just stopped?
I think they were. I think we saw it here in Arkansas as we slaughter some of our own cattle at our local processors. And we could get a calf in a couple of weeks or two. My wife booked some the other day. We're December of 2021 before we have calves booked up, but she started to rebook now. And that's the soonest they had books open, is 2021. So we don't have the capacity to kill these cattle without these big packers. And they understand that, and we have to grow these small mom and pop operations. Now in Arkansas, there was a program I was watching that we as a state are going to spend $10.4 million improving our local Arkansas small meat packers and processors. They've been given grants to get these up to scale, and there's only 4 daily inspected plants in Arkansas, and they're trying to increase that number. I think there's some pressure from other cattle groups trying to to put that out there that we got to have some more processing capacities. And if we in Arkansas, 1 in every 6 job is comes from agriculture in Arkansas. And I know it's a lot of those ways in a lot of other states and cattle producing states. And so I think some of our local legislature is seeing that we've got to help some way and promoting our federal agenda with some of these prime acts and expanding these markets is going to be really important for our future. And like I said, I don't 8 or 10 years down the road doesn't help us, but we need to do it now.
Yes, we do. Well, speaking historically, Jay Platt, is it surprising that the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 is still not being enforced? Is that when I got involved with RCAF and I started learning about that, I was stunned. I mean, there's laws on the books to help protect producers from being taken advantage of, and yet they're not being enforced.
Well, I think part of that, you have a very powerful meat lobby group. Also, I think that courts have been very confused on this issue. They have conflated antitrust statutes with the PSA. So they've come up with this requirement that you have to show a harm to competition, which takes you to the antitrust, Sherman antitrust, those kinds of statutes. Whereas PSA is not designed, it's designed for an entirely different set of circumstances, but they've conflated the two to where they have basically said there is no PSA, there's only antitrust remedy because of this requirement that you have to show a harm to competition. Whereas the PSA language actually talks about unfair practices, which is very different than an anti-competitive, monopolistic type of thing that the Sherman Antitrust, Clayton Act are designed to remedy. So it is sad that it has not been enforced, and it should be, but there are some real roadblocks between what courts have done and then your meat packing lobbyist.
Mm-hmm. Bill, this cattle long-range plan is well thought out. But some would say, just like Mike has said, that 5 years is too long. We have got to get some relief now because people are struggling, people are hurting. What can people, when we do these Facebook Lives, the goal really is to get people involved and for people to see themselves as part of the cavalry, right? Because the cavalry isn't coming. We are just grassroots producers joining with other grassroots producers to try to make a difference and to help save our industry, which is why this plan was ever created. So if we're to leave folks on an action plan to say, okay, here's what you can do right now, and here's what we are going to be working on immediately, what does that look like? Give people something that they can do. We're in the holidays, Christmas week, but in the next week or two, because this long range plan doesn't mean anything if people don't engage and then get involved. And just like Mike said, call your senators, call your congressmen, rattle some cages. We have to do this now.
Well, perhaps the most important thing to realize is that the industry looks the way it does today, not because of any natural phenomenon. This is by design, and those who have been leading our industry have been leading in a direction that benefits only certain sectors of the industry. So it's a wake-up call because every producer knows that the marketplace is broken. You can't have consumers purchasing beef at the highest levels in history. You can't go through the highest export volume periods in history. And you can't go through the period with some of the strongest demand in history for your products and then reconcile that with severely depressed cattle prices. So the first thing that producers have to do is stop doing what you've been doing for the past 10 years, because that has brought us where we're at today. So that means to do something different, you need to organize. You will get nothing done on your own. You have to work as an organization. So the producers need to look at the organizations and identify the one that they believe has a plan to further their interests, their individual interests, and their industry-wide interests to strengthen the U.S. cattle industry, to ensure that the cattle industry receives its competitive share of every dollar in revenues generated by the beef from their cattle. Now, I would submit there's no other organization that's as aggressive as we are. We're the largest producer-only cattle association in the United States, but we're a fraction of what the meat packing lobby is that Jay just talked about. So the most important thing that producers can do right now is to join our organization, join with us and help us implement this plan. And as Mike indicated, one of the first questions that every member of Congress will ask when we go to talk to them is, well, how many people do you really represent? And if we could say that we represent 10, 20,000 independent cattle producers scattered across the United States, sit back and watch how quickly we can get some of these reforms in place. And again, we're not reacting right now. This is not a reactionary plan. It's a forward-looking plan. And so for those members wondering, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to want next year? You know, after we do your first request, for example, pass legislation to require packers to revitalize our dysfunctional cash market. What are you going to want next? Well, we know what we want next, and we can tell them up front. So this is a professional plan. It's a plan that's specific to the industry. And in order for this plan to be successful, it's going to take more than the membership that RCAF has today. Our membership has to grow significantly in order for this plan to be implemented soon enough to preserve the critical mass of cattle producers that we have today. I don't know how many we've lost. I don't know how many we're going to lose in the short term, but I'm fearful that the number is staggering, that we have lost a significant number of producers from 2015 forward. And those are producers who should never have experienced a economic cost price squeeze like they're experiencing now when you look at the willingness of consumers to buy more beef and at higher prices than ever in history. I mean, the factors are as favorable as they can possibly be for our industry, but nobody has yet implemented a plan. In order for us to be successful, we need this plan to be a producer plan, and we need producers to begin supporting it. And the very first step in that is to join us, become a member of the organization that's fighting for their interests.
Last question, and I'm going to present the same question to all of you, which is, Bill mentioned, and it's true, when we go to DC and we approach Congress, they say, how many people do you represent? Because politicians think in terms of votes. That's how they think in terms of. And so what do you say, and I'll start with you, Mike Jones, what do you say to people that say, oh, RCAF just came out with this plan just to have a membership ploy. This is just a ploy for them to gain members. What do you say if you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody, and again, to bring them into locking arms, linking arms with us and saying, hey, let's get something done. What do you say to them in terms of why they need to become part of this association?
Well, Tatum, I've been members of other associations as well as the NCBA in the past, and you know, RCAF is the only one that's ever took me in and said, "This is what we're going to do. We need help. We're volunteers. We're cow calf people. We're feeder calf people. We have to do it together." If you don't think that spending $100 to keep your livelihood going is something you can do, then it's going to get really tough, because we need members. We need members not to just pay their dues and go to conventions and wear a cowboy hat. We need guys that are going to call their senators and representatives and talk to their local producers, to their local legislative people. This is not something that it's not a I don't know any better way to put it, but this is not a boys club. This is an organization to produce and further cattle for the future of our kids and our future of America. And I think that you got to get on board and step up and get in with us, lock arms, and let's go to work so we can keep this deal going. I didn't work all this time to let it fade away and eat beef from Brazil. And I don't think any other producer that you sit and talk to is going to feel the same way, that they didn't work this long and hard to be in a situation to just let this dry up and blow away.
Jay Platt, I'm going to give you the same question, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a twist because Mike just brought up Brazilian beef. One of the things you have researched quite a bit are the relationships pertaining to the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and really that global supply chain that the meat industry has, or the beef industry has created for us. How long have you been part of RCAF, first of all? Because you've been a member for a long time.
Okay, 1990s. I can't remember the exact year, but it's been a long time.
So what do you say to producers who are listening to this and saying, RCAF, that sounds great, but I think you're just doing this to get some free press? What do you say?
I would echo Bill. No producer can do this alone. A single producer will get nowhere with a congressional delegation. I would say to producers, and I'm a cow-calf producer, I have no other outside source of income. My wife doesn't work in the schools. We're cow-calf people, period. I would say to producers, read the plan and then ask yourself, because it's easy reading. It's short, concise. Read the plan and ask yourself, would these ideas help my profitability? And I think any fair reading of that, any producer reading it fairly would have to conclude and say, yes, that would help my profitability. Therefore, join us.
Mm-hmm. George Washon, how old are you, George?
I am 23.
23 years old. You come from a long line of cattle producers in Washington State. And your family, you fight all sorts of things out there. Your grandpa, you told me at convention this year, you're fighting the wolves. You're just, there's a plethora of issues that you're fighting.
Yeah.
And does it, I'm a 5th generation producer here in Kansas. It blesses my heart to know that I've been able to get involved. I was 38, I think, when I got involved with RCAF. You're 23. That generations that have come before us to fight, to build these ranches, to build these operations, that have weathered the weather, that have weathered the wolves, that have weathered all of these things. Do you think this is your time, and those people watching, this is our time in history to do our part, to really link arms and fight back and save something that's worth saving? At 23, how do you view this fight? Because you've gotten involved very young on our board, and you've taken the deep dive.
Well, I'd say this is it's a fight to save our livelihood, to stay in business, to keep on going forward, and, save the industry for many years to come. When it comes to this plan, I'll echo Jay. The best thing that I can say is read it for yourself. If you're in the cattle industry, whether you're a current member of RCAF or somebody who has thought about joining RCAF, take the time and read it. It's relatively concise, and it explains what RCAF's point of view is on quite a few issues. This is our game plan of how to save the cattle industry, how to keep the cattle industry in business, and how to keep them as independent United States cattle producers, not part of a global integrated beef chain. This is all about us staying independent and being able to make our own choices as independent cattle producers.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Such a good answer. I appreciate you all so much being on this call and being on this video. And I would encourage you, if you're listening to this and any part of this has piqued your interest, please check us out. Go to our website, www.r-cafusa.com. Read about the different things that RCAF has done since the beginning. We started in 1998. Is that right, Bill? In response to the National Cattlemen's Association merging with the Beef Packer Lobby. And so RCAF is a group of like-minded grassroots producers that are willing to say, we're going to fight to stay independent, and not on my watch are we going to lose these places, what our many times generations before us have fought for. And so I would ask you, please join us. It's much less about the $50 and much more about the fact that we need support. We need a wave of grassroots support so that regardless if it's the state level or if it's the federal level, we can say we have X amount of grassroots producers behind us. There's not many of us left, and we're shrinking every day. So please consider joining us. It'd be a great honor to be able to do battle in the trenches with you. Again, you can join us on our website. It's $50 to be a member. Consider it's Christmas time. Consider giving a gift of membership. It's a great gift. Gift your neighbor, gift your hired man, gift your kids a $50 membership. It always fits, and it's always the right color, right, Jay? An RCAF membership. So thank you so much for joining us. Are there any closing comments before we sign off here? No. Have a very Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year. We will be back next week, next Wednesday, and we will be talking with different board members about some of the other points in our plan. Again, thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.
Good night, all.
Good night, all. Merry Christmas.